Hello, my tuning fellows. Today I want to go back to the basics. I have been overwhelmed recently with a lot of questions and inquiries from new tuners asking the basic question, how do I set up my charts? So I feel like I have neglected the beginners out there. I was a beginner myself, struggling to understand what is the editor, what is the scanner, how do they work, what do I use, one for whatever scenario. And I'd watch other YouTube videos and they were going super fast, and I'm struggling to keep up, and I'm pausing the video and restarting, all in an attempt to understand. So that's okay. The majority of my videos are catered to the proficient tuner going looking to go to the next level, and even the professional tuners using my software and tools and so forth to make their lives a little bit easier. But I was a beginner myself, and so I want to take a second and kind of go back to the basics here. So we are looking at the scanner. The scanner is used to plug into the CAN bus and get sensor data and record that data. We then look at that data, and then we'll take that and we will modify the tune. So let's go back over here. This would be the tune, and all of these data structures in here. And when I say data structure, right, like the ECM has this table built in. It also has these flags in here, slow or fast. And it also has a scalar, which are these simple numbers. Whatever we are logging in our scanner, we need to match the data model that exists inside that ECM. We can't just willy nilly do whatever we want or guess. It needs to be a one-to-one match. So let's go over that. The first thing we're going to do is we are going to set up a chart for our mass airflow sensor. So this is probably the first thing that any brand new tuner is going to tackle when they look at and learn to tune. So that is also where we will start. This is fundamental type stuff. So we'll go back over here, and here is our scanner. Now I'm going to remove these guys here, but let's take a look overall real quick. Over here, this is essentially our database. This is all of the raw values over here that we are going to make charts from and turn this raw data into actual information. So the first step in turning this raw data into information is going to be creating some charts and graphs. We're not really going to go over the real time over here, this chart versus time, but we may touch on it. Actually, before we get to that, let's point out one other thing. Um, well, first of all, we can see that we have some units over here. This is in Fahrenheit. I can right click. I can change the unit to Celsius if I like on the fly, and I can add or subtract decimal places in here. So just kind of a nice little feature. And you can set this up. As long as you have it logged, you can change how it appears in here, as well as in your chart versus time, and as well as your regular charts and graphs that we'll go over creating. One other thing, we can't do it here. Let's actually take a look at VCM Scanner. And while this opens, now that we don't have a log popped in over here, we can right click and change the polling interval. Generally speaking, for the critical items, you're going to want to max this out. 10 milliseconds is what you're going to want to get on a Gen 4 and Gen 5 ECM. They are fast enough and powerful enough that you're not going to overwhelm them, unlike the Gen 3 dinosaur computer. So don't be afraid to do that. Certain things you may want to give a rest. So uh, engine runtime, right? Like I have this to 1 second. There's no point in me updating this or trying to update it every 10 milliseconds. And by the way, just because we're asking it for 10 milliseconds doesn't mean you're going to get 10 milliseconds. So just keep that in mind. The other area is this log details in here. So you can see very handy section, trouble codes. So any DTCs that you have set, you can always see what's going on. This is also super handy for when you have failed the math, or perhaps you think you have failed the math. It isn't failed unless there's a DTC for it. Even if the check engine light isn't on, you got to make sure it's in here. So this is also really nice to be able to keep track of those things over there. And you can hit this thumbtack and it will always stay pinned whatever size you have it. You can click it to turn it off and then you get this view. Now, these are kind of all my tabs. This is a lot, by the way. So in here, like I will have a full layout. This is going to be for when I'm back at the house and I want to take a look at logs and I want to see everything. I'm going to use the full, but I also have a driving layout. So when I'm actually driving around, I'm going to minimize the amount of tabs and charts and graphs over here and really have a laser-like focus on what I need because that extra time and processing power to render things can slow things down, right? So I'm going to keep an eye on the critical things, probably, some fuel trims and some timing and knock retard type things, but otherwise it's going to be as little as possible. So let me just kind of get rid of some stuff in here. And we're going to start from scratch, working on that math. So look at this. We have our raw data and no way to turn that into information with any type of charts. So over here in layout, you can go to default layouts, right? And this is going to give you a few options to start from. Probably mm, not super helpful, but maybe, just to kind of help you. You can also do add to layout and you can manually add some things in here. But let's just pick diagnostics. I don't know. We'll just, sure, this looks good. Whatever. I don't know what each one of these does. I don't use them. But now we see we have, it's kind of cluttered. So let's get rid of this guy. It's still over here. Typically, I don't use the gauges. This may be nice. You can hit the play button and you can go through the logs and you can speed it up. We can go 5 times the speed and look at it as if we're actually driving. If we put it in one speed, typically the gauges don't really appeal to me. I also don't like to have this top bottom thing. Some tuners do, pick your preference. Me, I like it if you drag it here to the middle like this, you now have certain tabs. You can always change it at any time just by clicking and dragging it to wherever you like. So pick your poison, no big deal. Okay, let's stop this nonsense from playing. And now let's take a look. We're going to go over here. We'll go to graphs layout, and we're just going to kind of remove these little guys in here. And we're going to start from scratch. So we're going to hit this down arrow here. We're going to say add table. With version 5 of HP Tuners, they added an add histogram, a true histogram, which is awesome. We're not going to get into that today. We're just going to do some table type stuff. In the past, like if you read old forum posts or whatever, people will call these charts and graphs histograms, but that's just kind of slang. That's not really a true definition of a histogram. So we'll hit add table and let's go in here. We are now going to start to mirror what we see in the tune. So again, let's just take a refresher here. We need to create these columns and we also need to create a row. So what we're going to do is I'm going to say, well, I want to see something related to math. If I type in math and I hit this little gear, it's now going to say, let me go back over here actually. It's now going to say, of the data that you actually have logged and given me to use, do I see that? So if I go in here, if I type in math and limit to what I have in the log, it says here's everything that could potentially be used. Now the custom math you can ignore. So really we're looking here. Now you can create your own custom math, but that's more for advanced. So we're talking entry level beginner getting comfortable with HP tuners. So we're going to pick mass flow rate. And typically you're always going to hit yes here. There will be reasons in the future to not hit yes, but for now we're going to do that. And it's saying, well, I'm going to tell you how many grams per second you have. For the math, we can change the units here at any time. You're never locked in. So if you want to change to pounds per hour at some point, you can do that. My preference, anything airflow, I try to be consistent and I always pick grams per second. So now if I just close this window, it says, hey, In this entire log, regardless of whatever happened, the average airflow from MAF is 29.8 degrees. Does this result look like what we see in the tune, the data structure inside the ECM? No, it does not. I need some columns. So if we look at this, it's telling us our columns are in hertz. That is an electrical term, it's frequency, and these are the frequency. So in the United States, for instance, alternating current that comes out of your outlet in your house is 60 hertz. If you go to Europe and other places, it's 50 hertz. So this is just a pulse width modulated signal, pulsed DC current this many times per second. So I right click column axis, and copy labels. By the way, you can also change the units, which I wouldn't recommend to do this for math, but for other tables, this may be helpful. You can convert Celsius, Fahrenheit, um, and Kelvin is the other word I'm looking for. You can change for pressure units, pascals, kilopascals, PSI, and so on and so forth, which may be helpful to you. But pick one and stick with it. Be consistent between the editor and the scanner. We want to copy these labels. That saved us a ton of time. Kudos to HP Tuners for doing that. So we're going to go back to graphs layout, and what do we want up here? We want hertz, but if I type in hertz, it doesn't find anything. What about HZ? Doesn't find anything. So I'm back to math. Now, math, by the way, is a little bit of a special thing. They've given it an alias. We don't see math in here, but I could type mass and it does find it. So there's a few shortcuts. You know, map is the same way, manifold absolute pressure. That works. We're going to pick frequency. All right, this is our hertz. Double click, say yes, accept the defaults. We're going to paste that in there. And now when we close it, what do we see? Cool, we see some values. But this isn't really how we tune the math. All right, so if we look, but as an example, right, at 4,500 hertz, we have 21.4. So what do we have over here? At 4,500, we have 20.8. So really close. All right, but how do we know if 20.8 or 20.4 is any good? Well, really, this isn't helpful. So we need to modify this. So going back to graphs layout, we're going to click here. And maybe before we do, the thing that we need to understand is how we tune this is through our fuel trims. And when we look in what raw data do we have them. We have short and long term fuel trims for both bank 1 and bank 2. This is a V8, so we need both banks. Now we can see that the long term is 0 for both of them, which probably means that long terms have been disabled. Even though they're disabled, we're still asking the ECM what is our long-term fuel trims, and of course they're 0. So a lot of times what I'll do is verify this, like I'm just going to scan and I'm visually looking at these two zeros and making sure that they stay zeros, which they are. So we know they're disabled. So now when I come over to here, I'm going to say I need those in here. So we're going to click in here, and if I type in STFT, short-term fuel trim, guess what? We can see that's another alias. All right, and so we can see that we have a whole bunch of options to choose from. Now in this case, we can pick some of the standard custom math in here. What I'm interested is long-term fuel trims plus short-term fuel trims. Even though they're 0, that's still lumped in as 0, it won't change it. You could probably do, I don't think they have short-term bank 1 plus bank 2. So either way is fine, right? We just pick this, not a big deal. And now check it out. We can now see how accurate our tune was. We can make this a little bit more visually appealing and intuitive though. I like decimal places. So you can change this 0. We can add 1 decimal. You notice it changes right on the fly. So that's super handy. I like 2 decimal places for fuel trims. You can do what you want. Either way, it doesn't matter. It should, when you copy and paste special, preserve those decimals. The next thing is we can add a little splash of color. So we'll say 5%. If we're adding 5% of fuel, that's going to kind of be our maximum amount of red. And then we'll mirror this kind of symmetrically. So we'll say -5. Hey, that means we're rich. We have a little bit of extra fuel that we're pulling out, and that's okay. And you notice this changes on the fly. And you can certainly change the color at any given time to make it, however you want to. I will pick red. We could also say, well, I don't know, maybe we can do 10 and we can do -10. And you notice that just kind of changes that color intensity across the board. So this is what we see, right? But we do see something interesting here. We have some zeros. I highly doubt our fuel trims are zero. More than likely, what has happened is we have entered power enrichment. And so when you go into power enrichment, the fuel trims are no longer active because the narrow bands are useless. They only work at stoich. So now let's take a look. We need to make sure that we're logging um, equivalence ratio commanded. Here it is. Although there it is right there. So one is going to be one lambda. That's going to be stoich. If it's less than one, then we know it is power enrichment. We want to get rid of these zeros. So setting up your charts and getting the data in here is half the battle. The other battle is going to be filtering out the garbage. Typically, that's going to be transient throttle. So every time you are pushing the gas pedal down or letting the gas pedal out, transient fuel is involved, the virtual VE table is involved, and all kinds of things go crazy. And then also, we don't want power enrichment while we're trying to dial in our closed loop. So how do we get rid of that? We're going to add this variable in here. And by the way, some kind of annoying thing, every time you change the parameter, it renames this. So we're going to name it math, but specifically, we want closed loop. So I'll just put CL to be brief. And now we're going to hit new variable, and we're going to click here to insert. And we're going to do EQ, and I'm going to hit this. Here it is, equivalence ratio commanded. Now when I double click that to add it, we're going to say yes. And now this is a little bit of a weird thing. Even though it says equivalence ratio, we're actually looking at lambda. These two are kind of opposites, where equivalence ratio of 1.5 is lean, um, or sorry, equivalence ratio 1.5 is rich, where 1.5 lambda is lean. So this has kind of always been a weird stumbling point for me. We're not going to get into the special functions. We will just leave this as is. So I hit OK, and now we're going to say, well, I want closed loop for lambda, that is 1. And now when I scroll over here, well, there it is. I don't have to scroll. All those zeros are removed. They do not apply for power enrichment during closed loop. And if I go here, and let's go to charts layout, we will add, and this is kind of the same way. I hit the plus sign here. What do I want to see? I want to see EQ ratio, commanded, accept the defaults. We can set our upper and lower limit here. We can change the color. And so here we go. So, and one other thing that I also like to do is I'm going to say, hey, my baseline is 1. So I'm going to enable this. And all this is doing is, if I zoom in a little bit, you can see this dotted line in here that's telling you this is stoich, and we've dipped below stoich. And so we are now commanding, oh, look at that. I don't like too many decimals. 2 is just right. I'm the decimal place Goldilocks. 0.85 is what our power enrichment is. So all that filter is doing is saying every time we're commanding power enrichment, we need to ignore whatever the narrow bands and whatever the fuel trims are doing. So at that point, we'd also need to say, well, maybe before we get to that. So what do we do with this data? We can click up here to select the whole thing, right click, copy. We're going to go here, and now we're going to right click, paste special. You may, depending on the scenario, multiply by a whole percent or just half a percent. So in other words, if you do half, let's say you're off by 10%, if you multiply by half, it'll modify this by 5% because, 5's half of 10. Typically, I'm going to do 1%. And here we can see we still have a pretty nice smooth graph. There is a little blip right in here, but I would caution you You can't just right click and paste special for everything. In this case, we need to make sure that we have a smooth math. We never want to end up with stuff like this. I see this a lot when I look at tunes on the forum. That's this is not good. Math does if you see this, you know you need more filtering happening or else you're doing something wrong. It should be smooth. And when I say smooth, I'm not talking about something like this that kind of bucks the trend. Yes, this little nub here is nice and smooth, but that does not follow the trend. Your math should be this nice curvilinear shape and look really nice. Okay, so that's the closed loop math. We'll do one other revision to this. And we're going to say, I need to worry about power enrichment. So you can save yourself some time, hit this clone graph, and that will just duplicate it, right? Everything is the same between these two. Well, let's name this power enrichment. We can leave all this other stuff the same except the filter. We don't want equals 1. We want something that is less than 1. And now when I look in here, of course, I don't have any data. Well, I do have a little bit of data. Just there's some artifacts in here, but everything is 0. Why is that? Well, that is because we're still saying we're needing to look at short and long-term fuel trims. But again, as I mentioned before, the O2 sensors and the fuel trims during power enrichment, they don't work. You have to have a wideband sensor, pure and simple. If you're going to get into tuning and learn it, you need one. There is no way around it. It will serve you well and is basically a required thing. Now you can type in WB for wideband. Sometimes that will work. If I do this, I have a user defined math, but if I pick that, it won't work. Why is that? Because we don't have any wideband stuff defined in this log file. So, but really there is a custom math called EQ error ratio. This is inbuilt into HP tuners. Now I can pick it, but I don't have a wideband in here, so the EQ error cannot be calculated. Once you have that, then you could do the same thing where you right click copy and then paste special into the scanner, or sorry, the editor. So that's one thing to keep in mind. All right, now let's talk about building. This is a 2D graph. Let's talk about building a three-dimensional graph. And let's look at the timing table. So let's review. We're going to go to Spark. Here's our high octane. And so whether or not you're going to be creating a table for logging your actual Spark or your knock retard, this is the format that you want. You need to know, am I getting knock right here or am I getting knock up here or kind of all over? Like you need specifics. So before we move on, just a couple other tidbits. If you are new, anytime you have an axis that's underlined, you can now edit the breakpoints. I'm not saying that you should edit all of them or any of them, and I'm certainly not saying you should edit the main Spark one. Sometimes, and you'll know when you are ready in your tuning journey to edit these things, but I could come in here and I could say, I want this 250, I want this 500, and I want this 625. You can do that. Wouldn't do that, but one good example, for instance, on this is going to be what if you're running boost? The stock table only goes up to 1.36 grams of air mass per cylinder. But what if you're running boost and you're like 2.5 grams per cylinder? Well, guess what? You will need to come over here, probably start 2.5, and then maybe you could, we'll just call this 1.5, and you could highlight and interpolate, and you can go down here and interpolate, and now you have a little bit more resolution getting you up there. Hopefully, you are not a new tuner and you're trying to tune a boosted car. That is a recipe for disaster. Start on NA and work your way up. I'm going to undo this because I don't want that. All right, so we know we need an axis for Spark. So, and again, we're going to right click. We can do column axis. We can copy labels. Here's another way to get to the edit. We could also change our units. Typically, everyone I know is always going to use RPM, even those metric dudes. But we could change it if we wanted radians or whatever uh, crazy thing. So let's hit copy labels. We're going to go back in here, graphs layout, down arrow, add graph, and we will pick Spark. Here's Spark Advanced. This is the thing that we're interested in. And column axis, we can do RPM if we wanted to. RPM is actually pretty easy to get. So what I like to do is if you expand engine once and double click on general, it will automatically add RPM. Yes, sounds good. Paste that in there. And now let's close this and take a look. All right. Hey, cool. We see Spark. We're done, right? No, we're not, because this is a two-dimensional chart and we need a three-dimensional chart with all of the rows. So how do we do that? Glad you asked. We're going to right click the rows and we're going to do row axis, copy labels. Now this says spark air mass, but spark air mass is just the label. This is really cylinder air mass, which is a calculation based off of the MAF grams per second and also the virtual VE or perhaps VE grams per second. Based off of the grams per second, the ECM goes through a calculation to determine how many actual grams of air are in the piston or in the cylinder for this combustion event. So we'll go here and we're going to right click, graphs layout, go down to Spark, and let's do here. We're looking for cylinder air mass. We could type in cylinder or air. We're going to ignore the custom one because those are always going to appear. I don't see anything. Cylinder air mass, we don't have it. So in this case, sure enough, if we go over to channels and we look over here, we don't have it. We have dynamic airflow, we have volumetric efficiency airflow, mass airflow grams per second, but I don't see anything here for cylinder air mass. So let's go in here and let's open up a different log. And so now if we look in here, we should see cylinder air mass. Boom, same thing as spark air mass. So let's add this now. So we'll right click, graphs layout. We're going to highlight spark. And then we're going to say cylinder and then use our trick. Boom, there it is. Hit yes. Now I already have that copied to my clipboard. I do want to make sure that this is set to grams. Whoops, I don't have it actually. So we'll go back. Right click, row axis, copy labels, and paste it in here. And there it is. Now, why do we pick grams? Very simple. Because this is set up in grams. Now, I could change it, row axis, units. I could change it to any one of these things. But if I do, I have to go back into the scanner and change it. So for instance, let's just say I pick kilograms for some reason and look at those values. Not very nice and friendly. I would then have to come over here and then change this to kilograms as well. But guess what? Now these values are wrong. I'd have to recopy that. I don't want to do that. So don't don't shoot yourself in the foot. Make sure you're on the right track. And I can do the same thing here with decimals. For Spark, 1 decimal is totally fine. Cell hits required. If we look at this, this is telling us only show me the average. The C is going to be for counts. So in this case, the scanner has said, well, you were only in this operating condition long enough for me to get one piece of data, one cell hit. Now, for Spark, that's probably fine, but when you start really fine tuning MAF and virtual VE, you're going to want more than one. So you can use that to say, hey, this 20.5 maybe is not super reliable. Maybe I want to get rid of that. So if we go back into graphs layout and I say Spark, we want 10. You notice a whole bunch of values just disappeared from that chart, right? As I change that. So uh, for Spark, it's not too critical, but again, I'm letting you know that this is available and you can be a little bit more selective to ensure that you have a proper amount of data set. We can also set our high values. We'll say, hey, anything above 30 is a lot. We'll turn that red. Low value, maybe we'll say is 0, and we'll turn that green. And so in this log, you can see timing went negative, very visually easy to tell, so on and so forth. But what if we want to say, I really kind of need to know the knock, right? I'm not super concerned. Like, I see I was commanding about this many degrees at wide open throttle. This looks right. Am I getting knock? Let's find out. We'll go back into here and we're going to click on. This is another annoying thing, by the way. If anybody from HB Tuners is listening, I would love to be able to right click on Spark, go to Graphs Layout, and have Spark automatically highlighted rather than me having to click that every single freaking time. This has caused so much extra mouse clicks, mouse miles, as they say in industry. It drives me crazy. So let's click here and we can say KR, knock retard. This is another one that HP Tuners has aliased. I don't have to type out knock retard. Now you notice this particular log is logging knock retard for every single cylinder, or just we can look at the high level one. So we'll say, yes, sounds good. Now, knock retard is sensitive, right? If I'm pulling out 1 degree, maybe we can say 2, right? And we'll leave this as white, and we can do that. And now we can see that we have this here. And we can see that we are getting some knock, but this is only part of the story. If you notice up here, we're saying average. Well, if I have a log that's 1 hour long, and then at some point I get 10 degrees of knock retard, that's a lot. I want to know it, right? I don't want that 10 to be averaged down to like zero point 0.1. So anytime you're looking at knock retard, I highly recommend you hit this plus sign. Now we see quite a different picture. We're almost 2 degrees of knock retard up here. A lot of areas, dude, we're looking pretty good. No knock, pretty happy. A little bit of minor stuff up in here. And guess what? We can right click, we can do copy, and now we can go into here. Let's, by the way, change this back to grams to be consistent. I'm going to right click, I'm going to paste special. Now I can add, but if I'm picking up 1 degree of knock, well, now I've just added even more timing. So I'm going to undo that. What we want to do is paste special, and we want to subtract. So you notice these values are purple, kind of bluish gray. That means the value is lower. If I right click and paste special and I do add, you notice that they've turned like this reddish color. And this is telling you they've increased. So just a general kind of weird thing how HB tuners works. So we'll go back to paste special. We'll do subtract. And now we can kind of see, um, now this timing isn't very smooth. And I would caution you in terms of right click paste special on the timing chart. This will lead to all kinds of spikes and valleys and non-smoothness. And you want to avoid that. You want your timing to be smooth. And look at this, by the way. How many of you knew that you could hold the left and right mouse button down and then move your mouse up and down to zoom in and out on these charts? But here's an example. We have this little trough in here, which if this were my car, I would smooth out. I don't like that at all. But here's one area. As I move the mouse on the right, you can see the left side, it's highlighting the cell. And so here we're commanding 6 degrees. If we wanted to take a half degree and knock out, we can go and we can look at it in there. But this is still only part of the story when dealing with this knock business. So let's go back here, just kind of while we're talking about things. Let's make use of this chart versus time. So right click charts layout. I'm going to gut this section out here. I like that purple color, so we'll leave that. And what we want to do is, let's look at this knock retard. We can hit yes, sounds good. And we want max, we'll just pick 2. And so here's what we see, right? If we go over here, we can see that we get well, not substantial. We get about a degree of knock, and we can see it, the ECM slowly walking it down. This is it being with the OEM tune overly cautious. I had a moment of knock, but I kind of want to wait to see if things are going to get worse before I just slam in all of the timing. So in this case, when we look at this graph, this is kind of what we're seeing, right? Like we hit a big moment of knock and then it slowly starts walking its way down. So it's not like all of this stuff is false knock. This is just the ECM kind of holding over and waiting. And this, of course, is something you can tune. Here, if we go into the retard section and you look at recovery rate. So to me, this would be an indication that, hey, we had a little bit of knock and it cleaned up, right? We didn't have anything to worry about. I could probably be more aggressive in my recovery rate, meaning I'm going to restore timing more quickly. But we can also see, because our quest for tuning knock is still isn't over, this particular vehicle has first knock enabled. So every time you slam the gas, it's going to pull up to 4 degrees of timing just because it's a nervous Nelly. Regardless if timing will or won't happen, or if it's historically happened there or not, it's just going to get paranoid and it's going to start pulling out timing. Of course, another place to look is static retard, which in this case is zeroed out, so we don't have to worry about that. I don't want to turn this too much into a knock retard um, video. I did make two other videos regarding that that really goes into details of this, but I kind of just also want to caution you that just because you have it logged in the scanner does not mean that you can trust it and that you should just slam it back into the tune and call it good. You do need to think about it. And that is really where we start getting into understanding the importance of these filters. We just have a simple one here. Just show me only EQ ratio of, stoic. But we really want to filter out transients. MAF and virtual VE need to be tuned in steady state. And then we can worry about the much harder quest, which is transients. So always understand that. You can't always trust the graphs to be 100% accurate and error free. We always have to look at those with a critical eye to say, these are a suggestion, they're data driven, they're as objective as we can be, but they're not perfect. We do need to look at, the overall idea, what is happening in here. So I hope this helps bring some light into what's needed for these charts. This isn't, end all be all everything, but this is hopefully enough to get you started understanding. You right click, copy labels, and paste them in here, and you can go on from there. I guess one other thing, hey, while we're at it, if I hit the plus sign, remember, go back over here, we have all the knock over here, right? So we could very quickly and easily, we'll go to graphs layout. I'm going to say this will be cylinder 1, 2, 3, so on and so forth. I can now say KR, and then we'll pick cylinder 1. We can do KR, cylinder 2. We can do KR, and obviously I'm not going to do all 8, but I think you get the point in that, hey, cylinder 1 doesn't look too bad. Cylinder 2, picking up a little bit more knock. Oh, cylinder 3, hey, that's the one that's giving significant knock. Maybe I should check the spark plug in that one and see if there's anything funky going on in there. But you are now able to very quickly, once you set up kind of this master knock chart, just duplicate it and just change one thing, and then you save yourself a bunch of time in looking at all these things. Anyway, I hope you found this useful. Let me know if there's any other specific charts that you want to understand how to set up and build. We haven't even talked about building custom math. Maybe that could be a part 2 in the future, but let me know what else you want to see. Either way, I hope you guys found this useful. And if you did, I will see you in the winner circle.